In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak wanted investors to fund their idea, an idea that eventually became Apple Computers. Most investors said no. Finally, a few venture capitalists loaned them a few $100,000. The company now has a market value of $220 billion. The new documentary, Something Ventured, describes the process. The process didn't start well. Those initial investors were not thrilled with Steve Jobs.
There was one board meeting that he took his shoes off and put his bare feet up on the table, and I said, "You're excused until you can come back here and act like a board member." He put his shoe back on. He just needed some training and some direction and some manners.
Steve Jobs is a national treasure. He is so visionary and so bright. I had to fire him, though.
Why did he have to fire him?
He got crosswise with the very CEO that he brought in, a man named John Sculley, who was running PepsiCo at the time. And Steve wanted to make his Macintosh computer and went off and hired a separate building, literally put up a pirate flag and ran it as his own operation. And that was enough for Sculley to say, it's him or me, and put that question to the board. The board said, we're keeping Sculley, bye-bye Jobs.
Jobs came back eventually and now runs Apple.
Jobs came back, and interestingly, Don Valentine from Sequoia Capital, who funded Apple and Cisco, among others, said that he'd much rather fund someone who has had a bit of hard knock along the way, because they're all the hungrier to prove the difference and to prove that they can succeed. And when Jobs came back, I think most people would agree that he sure succeeded.
And Jobs himself says being fired was a good thing to have happened to him.
Absolutely.
Taught him something.
Absolutely. There's actually an amazing commencement address on YouTube right now that you can watch where he talks about how it was, in a way, the best thing that ever happened to him.
And the venture capitalist told you this is routine, that most founders of businesses are gone within a year and a half.
If you're lucky, you're going to be successful and your company's going to get big, and then you're going to get fired.
If they got to go, they got to go.
I operate from the principle that give him his shot, help him as much as we can, hope that he makes it. If he doesn't make it, off with his head and on to the next guy.
Their documentary tells the story of Cisco, which is now worth more than $150 billion.
In 1984, Cisco Systems was a two-person company, the husband and wife team of Len Bosak and Sandy Lerner.
It was certainly run out of our house.
Cisco's product was called a router, and it solved a very big problem. It allowed all kinds of computer systems to talk to each other easily.
It was a desperately needed product. But no one would finance Cisco.
They tried to raise money unsuccessfully for 3 years. Eventually, a few venture capitalists saw the possibility in Cisco, but they didn't think the founders were great managers.
The people at Cisco, if you were designing hard to get along with people, they got the model right down.
I think that we were difficult to work with.
We bought a third of the company for $2.8 million.
We hired a shrink. He eliminated fighting in the open hallways, physical fighting.
I had very much alienated the other people in the company. At Cisco, you know, being the only woman and a technical woman, I think I was just very, very frightening. Now I was 35 years old. And he said, well, I think today's your last day. Never walk back in.
I don't think they've ever forgiven either of us.
So she's a good entrepreneur. She creates new ideas.
She's a fantastic entrepreneur. And here's the thing, it's not just Sandy. It's a very different skill set to think of an idea, be that sort of cutting-edge entrepreneur, than it is to run a company and grow a company.
And This is really true. Most founders gone 18 months?
The statistics are roughly 40 to 45%, so that's a pretty big percentage.
And I think they include in that people who step into another role. Actually, Sandy and her husband, ex-husband, Len, stepped into different roles for a little while. It didn't work out, unfortunately.
And it's not like you can feel all that sorry for them when they started with a $3 million investment. Cisco's now worth about $150 billion.
They actually sold all their stock pretty quickly. They were smarting from what had happened, but they still walked away with about $170 million, which I would be happy with.
But it was still their company, and so I mean, I still think you have this sense that it's your baby that you've brought into this world, and so the big question is, does money make everything better?
Well, the New York Times, which is hardly friendly to entrepreneurship, in my opinion, called your movie a movie about capitalism, and surprise, it's a love story.
It's a nice thing to hear. I mean, look, their business is an overbroad term. It means big business, small business, entrepreneurs, large, stuffy institutions. But I think the notion of portraying the underdogs, that American spirit of someone with an idea, unstoppable, that somehow they'll get that idea up and running, that's the love story. And I think everyone roots for an underdog, and these underdogs wound up doing some pretty amazing things.
And the power of an idea. Venture capital was a new idea. Throw some money at a new company, and most of it fails. I guess 9 out of 10 times it fails. Sometimes they lose a lot of money, but that one hit makes them rich and makes all of our lives better.
True.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dana Goldfein and Dan Geller. Next, the ultimate movie about capitalism. Atlas Shrugged is finally here when we return.
Get out of here. You do not come into my office and tell me what you will or will not allow me to do.
What I meant to say.